Hello and welcome. Today I am joined by Gareth Ziyambi, who is Clinical Director at A to Z Elite Health, and he's also Consultant Physio for GB Diving at Dina Asher Smith. So you're Clinical Director at A to Z, aren't you, Gareth? Just
Yes,
tell me,
I
we were
am.
talking a little bit about managing, welcome first off, but we were talking a little bit about managing a business as well as doing your day job. So how's that going for you?
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you for having me on. It's been a while we've been talking about it, so it's good to be finally here. Um, yeah, I think it's a real challenge. I think for me, it combines the two things that I'm most passionate about. I think I first got into physio because I enjoyed, helping people, but also enjoyed sport. So I kind of feel like I've got the best of both worlds, being both in private practice and being in elite sport. Having tried both full time at one point or another. I found this is the best balance. But as you suggest, it's definitely a challenge. I think, first of all, in private practice, it's not just about your clinical skills, it's about running a business as well. And I think there's all of those skills that you have to have, from the finances to the marketing to, making sure the business is compliant with all the regulations. And these are maybe things that we're not taught, as part of physio school, maybe in difference to the chiropractors and the osteopaths who do have a business model in their courses also, I believe. But certainly from a physio point of view, these are things you kind of dive in headfirst into the deep end, and you learn as you go along. So I think that's been a challenge, and obviously trying to set up maybe your philosophy, trying to infuse your business with your philosophy and how you want to do things. Because, for instance, where I am, the half-mile radius is about 40, 50 other practices. And to differentiate yourself, you got to look at what you're passionate about, where your skills lie. And, I think it's important just to have that treatment philosophy. So there's the challenge of that and trying to, keep that going. But at the same time, working in elite sport, which, at any moment, in time when you're working with athletes over a longitudinal level, if they get injured, you drop everything. And if you need to see them every day, that's what you have to do. And then it means there can be a lot of juggling, but it's also the travel, that comes into it, and needing to travel to, the competitions just in support of them. And so that's great from that point of view. But then, from a business point of view, it can be tricky, particularly, if patients have expressed a strong preference that they want to see you as opposed to others in the team, or simply that the consultant has said, go and see Gareth. And, so the patient insists, no, it's Gareth I want to see. It was certainly, now I'm in a better position just having other staff, with me. And what we've really tried to do is to say, have the patients have a confidence in a system rather than dependence on a person. And I think that's a very important distinction, for me, so that the system and the thing that we're bringing, whether I'm delivering it or whether another physio is delivering it, or the osteopath or strength coach, what the patient is able to see is that there's a consistent thread throughout the whole process. And try to move away from dependence on a person. Oh, I only see this person because only this person understands. And I do get that and it's not denying people the chance to have that choice. But it is also, if you do get injured and that person is not there, well, it means that you can slot in, and it means that you can. And actually, what we push is the fact that you benefit from, yes, not only a consistent approach, but also from different inputs. Sometimes my colleagues pick up on things, that needs to be done, and by and large, I think that's worked well. But certainly the challenge, last year and just after COVID of traveling, is that because I was just on my own, I would have to shut down the clinic. And that was very, very challenging. I think when you look at the balance at the end of the month, you go, oh. But yeah, but I think, with I think it was also important, COVID changed a lot of things. I did have other staff before that, but as a result of COVID, I had to let them go. So it was effectively just starting up again, rebuilding. Um, and particularly, there was a number of clinics that either got bought out by others or ended up shutting down as a result. And so I do count myself very fortunate that, I've managed actually not only to rediscover what we had before, but actually to progress beyond that. So it's been really good.
Yeah, and so when you're building your team and you say how important that philosophy is, that
Yeah.
you've got it in your head, you've got the
Yes.
vision. How do you communicate to them so that you are consistent? You can have the processes in place, but I guess they need to buy into what your vision is.
Yeah, I think that was very true. I think the first thing is getting the right people. I think that's the most important thing. And I think there's two ways of going about it. You're either going to get people that don't necessarily have that much experience, and you're going to train them up in that philosophy. And I did try that for a while, but I think what I found is that the market is very competitive. So eventually, people learn the skills, and it makes them more marketable. So they end up so I actually just changed tack a little bit. I decided, well, I would look for people that maybe are similar in background to myself. So they already have experience in elite sport, already are used to working in multidisciplinary teams. And so wanting maybe just to transfer those skills into, so they kind of been there and done that, but also in a place where they want to transfer those skills and use the skills that they've learned within a private practice, because not every private practice setting is going to offer the same opportunities to use those skills. And my philosophy has always been about working with Joe Public in the same way as I work with elite athletes. And a number of people say that, but I think until you've worked in elite sports, the understanding of multidisciplinary support and working towards a goal, using objective measures to determine progressions, and having a team approach to problem solving in terms of that, and working with goals really, which is what you're doing on a day-to-day, and particularly the ability to monitor the return to activity or hobbies, as we'd say, for I think all of those, processes, and how to integrate strength and conditioning or nutrition or, osteopathy or physio, and all of those things. These are things that are innate when you're working in a multidisciplinary team. And rather than trying to teach that, it was just better to have people that are already exposed to that and are used to that. So that was the first thing really, was getting people that have already had that experience. And that took a long time. It took about a year actually, because I did a number of interviews, and I always knew I wanted to have a strength coach and a physio. And in my mind, I wanted to start off with another physio, but actually, as it happened, I ended up finding the strength coach first. And sometimes you find a good person, you think, well, you're either going to wait or you just say, no, no, no. You find the person, grab them with both hands. So that's how and then actually in terms of physios, I managed to find a couple, again, with that philosophy already ingrained in them. So I think once you have that, everybody is familiar with the testing process and using the equipment that we've got to hand, used to working to goals and targets and achieving those. So actually the rest of it was just about how do we, and the communication there has really come about how do we want to integrate that, how do we want to work. Firstly, there's no ego, there's no one. It's, if a patient progresses, it's not because of one person's input, it's about all of our input. Secondly, the other thing has been to impress is that we almost have to stay in our lanes. So one person will have the overall kind of say, okay, this is the direction we're setting for the patient. I'd like you to work on this, you to work on that, and that's what we have to keep to. And if we do that, then at the end we reassess: are we on target? Yes. And the forum and the time to kind of say to suggest things is when we have our weekly meetings and we're discussing what we're going to do with you know, okay, this patient is now into week 2, we're going to focus on mobility. The goal by the end of the week is they have to achieve, you know, this target, and everybody's putting their heads together. Okay, how are we going to achieve that within our respective, and that's very similar to how it would work in sport, for example. So I think that was the second thing. It was just staying in our lanes. And then, you know, the third thing is about, you know, how to is just the prioritizing, let's say our time and how we go about it. So that approach doesn't lend itself to every patient that we're going to have, and so we have to discuss when that's appropriate and when it's not, and when it is, we're going to come together and work in that way. And some patients don't want that approach. You know, they just want to see the physio. They just want to, you know, see the strength coach, and that's it. And again, it's about respecting that as well. And I think the last thing is about just trusting the other members in the team. Let's trust each other to deliver each component that we need to deliver. And in doing so, when we're speaking to the patient, you know, and the patient is, you know, expressing, oh, that wasn't a session wasn't so great with this person, oh, but was really great, is just emphasizing it's everybody's, the sum total of everybody's input. And so I think that's really that we, you know, the communication platform we have, and it's about that regular and quick communication as well, so that actually the patient doesn't just hears one consistent message. That's the really important bit. Not a lot of fragmented bits. So they're not going to one person, then there's a completely new assessment. Oh, but this person said this and it contradicted what that person says. You know, so I think, you know, the team understands that, and I think it's been very easy to integrate that into our practice.
And have you seen a change in the patient, the consumer, in terms of what their expectations are over the last couple of years?
Definitely. I think you know, today there's a lot more information available on the internet, isn't there? So by and large, I expect that most patients, when they're coming into me, already have an idea. They already have been on Google. They've already had an idea, or they've spoken to someone who said they've got this. And quite often, it's like, oh, this person said I've got you know, my Achilles is the problem. Go and see a physio. So they will come. So and then they've looked it up, and they've looked up at the possible symptoms. And a lot of times what they're looking for is that what you're going to say is going to marry with what their perception of their problem already is. And sometimes if it's going to be completely different to their perception of what the problem is, you have to have a very compelling argument and a compelling reason why that's the case. And so I think it's to be expected. And to be honest, I do appreciate patients that are coming in, because for me, it shows that they're taking an interest in what the issue, and they want to find out and get down to the bottom of what the problem is. And then really, as physios, we're just working with that person to figure out what the problem is and how we can deal with it, rather than being you know, the all-encompassing, this is the problem, I will tell you what it is. And what you patients really expect nowadays a more proactive, a more integrated approach, working with them, rather than kind of you sitting on one side of the desk and saying to them, this is what it is. And I think that the more we've involved the, you know, the patient in that process, the outcomes have been a lot better. And one of our goals is always that patients really need to be educated in the process. By the time they leave, they understand things, because the reality is, in some cases, you see a person for half an hour every week. Well, the rest of the week, the real change is what they're going to do. Is what they're going to implement, not only in terms of the exercise and instructions, but they've got to then extrapolate that and integrate that into their existing lifestyle. We can't answer every question about every situation that's going to come up once they leave, walk out the door. And they have to understand that and then figure out, oh, the physio said I couldn't do this, but if I can't do that, it probably means that's not a good idea to do this activity because there's some similarities between the two. So their understanding the perception as well really makes a big difference. In fact, I once heard it said that, best practice is um, is maybe a combination of our kind of practice and what we understand in terms of secondly is the evidence base, but thirdly it's also the patient's expectation. And if you're going to come and do all these wonderful things and that was not consistent with what the patient was expecting or wanting, then is it best practice? And it's just something which is very very useful for me to always remember when dealing with patients.
Yeah, no, definitely, and it's good to see that you're doing well, even though it is quite competitive out there.
Yeah.
And why do you think that you have been able to prosper and expand when you've got so much competition?
I think well, firstly, I think physio is both an art and a science, really. And I think when we look at it, there's each physio brings their own kind of style and things to and interpretation and how they view things into it. And particularly being based in a place like London where there's such a large population, really there isn't enough physios to service the entire population of London, if we're really honest. But yes, you get certain areas where there's a big density so if you think of central London and certain areas, of course that's the case. And I think it does take you maybe understanding a couple of things. One, that you can't treat everybody. That's the first thing. And when you realize that, actually you start maybe focusing and saying, right, this is the kind of patient I want to have, these are the conditions that I'm happy to, or this is it's about finding your niche, really. And I think when you can define that, better, you're in a position where you'll have people that are coming that align with that. It's not going to be for everybody. And that's why I went back to the initial thing, because I think sometimes when we're trying to be generous and we're trying to be a one size that fits all, it's very, very difficult. And I think you can go down that route, and in which case, there's several brands that have gone down. We're going to have multiple clinics in many areas and service as many people. That's a good route to go down, and obviously that requires a lot of investment and a different set of management and a very simple philosophy. Or if you're going to be a smaller practice like mine, you really have to have a very clearly defined kind of approach, and that's what you're going to market and put out. And when you speak to the consultants, really great consultant who was fantastic at helping me to come to this kind of way of thinking was Kath Spencer Smith. And so she sat down and she just said to me, Gareth, if I'm sitting and there's a patient in front of me, and what's going to make me think, right, I have to send this patient to Gareth? And before you don't tell me you see anything and everything. What is that one thing? And I think that's what we have to try and distill. My answer to, after thinking about it, because I love problem solving, and part of it in sport is we always problem solving. How to make someone run faster, jump higher, spin quicker. How with an injury that comes, how we're going to rehab that quicker but more completely, or prevent there's a lot of problem solving and reasoning and things that go on, and I realized that's something I enjoy. So I said well, send me the ones that have been in pain for a long time. They've been to various people and things like that. And yeah, let me have a crack at that, because that problem solving approach, and maybe just the structured approach that we have to measurement, to managing pain, to a multidisciplinary approach, may lend itself really well in that instance. So yeah, so that was an example. So I think yeah, you have to. And I think the more I focused on that, and it's taken some time, but that starts to build up as well. And when those patients have had really complicated histories are coming through and they're finding, some success, that feedback's going back to the consultant. And so it's reinforcing that for the consultant. But then also then the patient is speaking to other people, and the word of mouth is really powerful in that way.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, it's good. Kath's very good. I agree.
Yeah,
She's
yeah.
excellent.
Yeah.
So then for going back for how you got involved in this, you mentioned how you got involved, but where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Zimbabwe. So I did all my education and actually my physio training in Zimbabwe. And really interestingly, before I did that, I had no idea what physio was. I'd never heard of it. And after I finished my A levels, my plan was either to do medicine, and if I really couldn't get into medicine, then a very distant second was pharmacy. No. And interesting tale, but then all the applications used to be paper-based applications, and submitted mine and got to the university. And at that time, we only had one medical school in Harare, and we we submitted. I got the slip to say that they'd received it, but when we got our results and thing, I didn't have. They couldn't find my application, so. Anyway, they looked at it, and because like it was it was one medical school, was so competitive to get in, and the deputy register, like I might struggle to get into medicine. So what I suggest is do another application, do a physiotherapy, occupational therapy, and BSc general, and and then if he just needs to get in the door, then he can always transfer. And I remember looking at this list and thinking, well, I haven't heard of the first two, and the thought of doing maths, physics, and chemistry for another 4 years, oh, I was like, no, I was done with that. But as it happened, it made me go and research a little bit about physio, and I still wasn't convinced. And then but I did enjoy sports, and I'd been playing national team hockey. I'd gone through the national age groups, and I was in the senior national. So I had a background and I loved sport, from that point of view. So it kind of did appeal to me from that. So I ended up getting BSc General, which I did, I think, two lectures in organic chemistry before I got the official transfer to physio. So by the time I got there, I was like, oh my God, I love physio. I'll never. And actually, as it happened, after the first year, I had the opportunity to transfer to medicine. But to honestly, I think having gotten into it, I really enjoyed. I thought I'll just see, where it takes me, and I never really looked back after that. It fit with my personality, my aspirations, the balance with sport. Although I was also interested in pediatrics at the time I qualified, and but yeah, sport won over in the end. So I did my rotations and my early sports experience, because I've been playing national team hockey, was actually a really transition. I just transitioned doing the physio for the women's national team, and then the men's, as well as doing some track and field as well. But I think the first real, if I can say, the first kind of world leading athletes I worked with, because I qualified in 97. So around about 2000, I started working with Davis Cup tennis team. And really, at the time, that the tennis players that were working with then, were Grand Slam champions. And so it was the first time really looking at how um, elite athletes, from that world leading kind of, and just integrating a lot of our in Zimbabwe, a lot of our athletes. There's so much talent that's there, but after school, the school systems are fantastic in terms of developing the sport and the competitions. But typically after that, you have to go to university, and so they'll go off to the American universities. And the vast majority of our athletes that, let's say, have medaled at Olympics and things, have always come via that system, gone off to the US, trained there, gained their skills, and then left. So Yeah, so and I think for me what was really good was the quality of our training program in Zimbabwe was really great quality to the extent that the tennis players were saying that in some cases they found that the level was better than what they were experiencing out there, which really piqued mine because I had nothing really, to compare with. And I remember going back to the chairperson of our department at the time and, just, saying to her, thank you, because actually, if it wasn't for her, kind of, there were only two places actually that were available when I got into physio. And um, I think there was a queue of people, and I think I was somewhere, my mom was somewhere in the eighth place, and this person just kind of took a gamble and said, "Okay, we'll give it to it." No, so I'm not sure what process she used, but I was very grateful to her, and actually she became a mentor, for me for many years. One of the early kind of sports physios in Zimbabwe, and kind of setting up an entire physio program, and it's really been fantastic. So I really credit her a lot with my interest in sports physio, and her name was Dorcas Matsivira, and she had a big influence even at the World Confederation of Physiotherapy level. So we just always had a really good interest in that. But just being able to work with that level of athletes, and for them having expressing satisfaction in our skills. So finally, I ended up going to my first Olympics in 2004, and that was with the Zimbabwe team. And worked with, then we had, a couple of really good track athletes, and swimmer, Kirsty Coventry, and she won our first medals for a long time. So three medals she got in Athens, and then four in Beijing, and was just really amazing to be there alongside, while she was achieving history. So I moved to the UK in 2004, and then about a year and a half later, I started working at the ES, well, what was the EIS now, it's the UK Sports Institute now. And so that was, so it was a multidisciplinary role at that time. And I think I got that role on the back of the fact that I'd been to the Olympics. And when I first came over to the UK, I was actually working, doing home visits in Lincolnshire, which was very interesting. It was completely opposite to what I was used to, but you get what you can. And then I just thought, for interview practice, I love sports. Went and I got the role really on the strength of the fact that I'd already been to the Olympic Games, and although there's no frame of reference for those, but yeah, I was very grateful to Mike Plush at that time for giving me the opportunity. But that really, the that's when I started working with the divers. The main center at the time was based in Sheffield, and that's where I was based. So throughout my time at the EIS, it was just 4.5 years, and then after that, independently. So it's been a long stint with with the divers, really.
Mm. And then to grow up in Zimbabwe, what was it like growing up there?
Well, for me, I've very fond memories, and um, I think I grew up like really in a golden age, like how the school system education was always very high priority in Zimbabwe. And I was I was fortunate. I went to private schools there, and it was, this, for example, I was schooled at St. George's College, and we literally had, like, 15 to 20 sports that you could play, that all the facilities on site at school. So and what was really incredible with that is that for each sport there was a number of divisions, and each school would be, you'd be very competitive against the other schools in terms of, so that was part and parcel of it. So we grew up, having a lot of competition. School was divided into 3 terms, and so each term there was different sports that you aspired, to. And then based on that, you'd be selected for provincial level, and then based on that, you'd be selected for national. So it's a kind of very established, school system, but also the very strong like education focus. So yeah, so for me, I kind of I grew up with a love of sport and outdoors, but also a very kind of high quality education, and yeah, no, I I really enjoyed my childhood. I think we it was obviously just post independence, which was in 1980. So by the time I was getting to secondary school, it was kind of the late 80s. So there was a lot of lot of changes that were happening and transition, but really I think we benefited a lot at that time. So by the time I finished my A levels in what was the A levels in 92, and then went on to university. So there was really there was no barrier to what I could do or achieve, and yeah, so still look back at those experiences, and I think they've really formed a lot of the way I think and who I am in a lot of ways. And it made it a very easy transition, actually coming over here. And so yeah, I still have that a lot in me, and I still I travel back to Zimbabwe regularly. At least I try and go at least twice a year because I still have a lot of my family that's there. And so for me, it's always a very kind of restful. I mean, I always say to people, my favorite time is when I'm out on safari somewhere. Some people it's a beach, some people it's a city break. For me, it's just being out in the middle. There's no mobile signal. It's just you and nature surrounding, and I find that to be really incredible. So yeah, so it was it's it's a very kind of friendly culture, very highly educated culture, and and I think always really enjoyed that. With sitting on a bus and reading a newspaper, and then you turn over the page, and the person next to you is going, "Oh, hang on, can you go back? I haven't finished reading that page." It's a very different experience to the tubes here, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah.
Where you
And how
just
was that
like
then?
it.
Moving to England then. So how was that? You come from what sounds like a great upbringing there, and
Yeah, no. Well, I think at the time when I moved, it really started coinciding with the time where the economy really started struggling, and so I had a private practice in Bulawayo, which was the second largest city in Zimbabwe, and was doing relatively well, there. Even then, I already had a multidisciplinary approach. I had it was just always something that I figured was the best way. But I've been working with some of the Test cricketers that were based in Bulawayo as well. So it wasn't, still working at a really good level. But inflation at that time was 600% per annum, and which meant that you had to increase the staff salaries by 100% every 2 months just to keep up with inflation. And the insurance companies at the time were giving us maybe a 30 or 40% increase every 3 months. And it was just, and I think in the service industry really struggled at that time, but that really benefited people that were, let's say, in wholesale and buying and selling goods, because whatever you bought for today, you could just multiply 600% and then sell it. And there were some unintended benefits, because, for example, if you're on a mortgage or something like that, well, at that level of inflation, your monthly payments remain the same number value, but in terms of people end up paying their mortgages with pocket change at the end, when the height of inflation was, I think, in 2008, where it got to, six-figure percentage. So it became like, so I think, for me, it was, I never really had any intention of leaving, but at that point, it was getting very difficult. And I thought, you know what, it would be interesting just to go and I wanted to test my skills, against others, see where it was. And the idea was, thought, well, I'll use the opportunity to go and learn and then come back. The plan was to come back in 5 years. So it's, in my view, it's still 5 years. But yeah, that was so that was really one of the main driver. It just became so difficult to and I have so much respect for those that managed to stay and continue because you had to constantly evolve and reevaluate from that. But I think the experiences that I've gained, and I do intend at some point to go back. When I've gone back, I've always tried to you want to just give back to the community, but I think that's very much in my mind. There's so many great physios here, but the experiences and things that I've had have really put me in good stead to have something to offer the next generation going back.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, yeah, I can see that.
yeah,
And then, so from a diving perspective, then, so you that's been a core bit of what you do and still continue to do.
yeah.
So was that something that you actively wanted to get into then, or was it just the coincidence of the stuff that you'd done previously?
Yeah, it was 100% coincidence. When I got into the EIS, my very first athlete I saw was a diver whose family had grown up in Zimbabwe actually. So it was oh look, there's some a point of interest and for the two of you. But because it was a multidisciplinary role, there was track and field, there was bobsleigh, squash, there was some of the indoor sports, volleyball. The boxing program later got set up there, the handball program in the run up to the Olympics. Yeah, so diving was so I was multi-sport, so I was doing a lot of the diving. Then in 2008. There was a change to the funding model at the time because a lot of sports had kind of said we want to have dedicated practitioners rather than just our athletes going into a center and just seeing whoever's there, because while the care was very good, there wasn't the integration with the sport wasn't as good per se. So the understanding of the sport and the progression was maybe somewhat limited, and the sports wanted a greater say in that. So a lot of the budget got transferred to the sports, for that. And then the EIS started employing people to work within a sport, for example. So some retained a multi-sport remit, but more and more you were working within sports. So I had a choice at that stage. There were, no, like I said, there was the boxing program was starting. There was the volleyball. There was, table tennis, and diving just interested in me because I really had no frame of reference for it. I'd kind of dealt with running, jumping, throwing at some point in the time, but nothing where you have to twist and turn in midair. And just how did you deal with the core stability or those kind of? So I just found it, fascinating as another sport, to learn. And so kind of thought I'll stick with that and just see, where it would take me. So um, around so started yeah, my first trips with diving were 2006, and around 2007 Tom Daly was emerging at that point, and that was when he did his first kind of senior trip. um, and obviously through to the Olympics 2008. um, and then I did the first of my stints as the head physio for diving from the end of 2008 up until 2010, and that was from within the EIS. And then I left the EIS at that point, and then about 6 months later, got asked, by the performance director whether I wanted just to travel with the team, and so I did that up until 2012, and then took over again as head physio, but now working directly for the sport between 2012 and 16. And then after that, I just stepped down. There wasn't a center in London at the time until Tom moved in at the end of 2013. And so from 2014, the London Center developed, and by the time in 2016 came, there was Crystal Palace, and there was Although Crystal Palace had been there for a long time, like the vast majority of divers have come from that program, really. But yeah, so I dropped the kind of head physio role and just remained as a consultant, just working with the London-based divers and doing the travel, and that's kind of where things have remained. But London has now evolved to become the largest diving center in the country. So we have about two-thirds of the program now based in London. So it's necessitated having another physio as well. So yeah, so work very closely yeah, with Emma and Carl Butler's the head physio overall for diving. So yeah, so it's been a really good period. But yeah, it's given me the opportunity really to marry my responsibilities with the practice, and also continuing to work in a sport that I've really come to appreciate and enjoy.
Yeah, well, then they've also been very successful, haven't they?
Yeah,
They've
yeah,
got a really good period. And what was it like? Tom Daley was such a massive star, still is.
yeah.
What was that like being around that?
So I think, his generation of divers, and if we, really the sport has been really blessed from that point of view. It's not rare that you have generational talents, and in Tom and Jack Law, for instance, we've had two of the one. Arguably, they've been considered the best divers in the world, and to have both of those emerging at around the same time, it was fascinating. It was great, because diving really, when I joined, if we made a final at the European Championships, we were happy. Let alone now, the expectation is medals and winning. It's a very different expectation, from where I joined. And so to be part of that transition, from that, looking to now making finals, not making finals, now to medals, and then now consistently knowing what it takes to win. Um, but Tom was so talented, and kind of, it's been interesting seeing his transition, as as a 12, 11, 12-year old, and going through as a child prodigy, and dealing with everything in his stride. And I think everything is progress, even though we had never had someone like that. I think, overall, looking back, that his career was so well managed, initially, by Andy Banks. And I used to work a lot with his physio in Plymouth at the time. Amanda Booth, she was excellent, and just kind of would put our heads together and try and come up with the best program, because you had a lot of people talk about putting young people up on 10-meter, and the risk of injury that there is to that. But when you're when you're competing at senior level at 12, you've got to be up on 10, and he'd been up on 10-meter a couple of years already. So that kind of put paid to the theory that we're going to wait until a few, and then they're mid-teens before we're doing that. Actually, it was just, looking back and thinking the physics, the force is equal to the mass times acceleration. So we kind of figured out, well, he weighs less. It's actually better to put him in that situation, and just manage and get him strong and manage his growth, because the body changes. And he took a year out, after he became world champion the first time, just to learn his dives. And that was a decision made by the performance director to protect him, but also to allow that growth and that maturation, and the strength that was going to go alongside it, and the learning of the new dives in a safe environment. Um, but what it's done having Tom and Jack is that it's meant that everyone who's coming up behind them is training with Olympic champions, is training with world champions. And so they know what the standard is. They look at their behaviors, and they look at, their competition mindsets, and they look at how they train, and what they eat. And when you have that day to day in your environment, you aspire to that. And that's always been the biggest thing, is having. And so I think the influence will be felt for a while to come, because that's the standard, that they've set. And you know, and Tom has always been a pleasure to work with. Really professional in terms of how very intelligent and knowledgeable. About I'd say the same about Jack as well. They know what they want. They understand their bodies very well. Um, very, you talk about how they speak to the media. It's, they never focusing on outcomes, but just on the process, and very fiercely competitive, really fit. And so they may come out and say, well, it was an okay performance today, but on the other hand, they go behind this because they want to win, and it's really great to see that. So yeah, no, and I think going through Tom with the expectations, and obviously he didn't do well in 2016 individually, although he had synchron, there was a lot of expectation on that, and just seeing how you had to wait the next 5 years, and how we changed a lot of things, and really focused on a training process and making him robust, and was a learning, by him, his coach, and the other members of the support team, and then just culminating in Tokyo, which was great. But it was really interesting because that day, when they did win the gold medal, really just sat there, and there was just that feeling like we were completely 100% prepared, and the only outcome was a gold medal. It just was never. There was no doubt and we watched how they went through their business, and just sitting. I'm usually sat next to Jane, and she's making notes, and we're talking, bits. But that day there was just 100% focus. We got up to watch the dive, sat down, waited for the next one, and it was just like, okay, this is it. It's happening today, and yeah, they delivered in a spectacular fashion. So it was it's great to have ringside seats as we.
Yeah, well, no,
Say.
definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. And how are your nerves at that point?
So really, really interesting because that day I can't say I had nerves. There was just that feeling of, you know what, we've done the work, and the guys were in such good form, and I think there are times when you're nervous, but there's also times when you just feel prepared, and actually the outcome is you kind of whatever the outcome is going to be, it's going to be. But and the way they were diving, and the way you could just see it in they came in between the dives, and in the build up, they were just diving the way they'd been training all the time. And when you're seeing it day in, day out, for 4 or 5 weeks in training, you just know that when it comes to the competition, that's what they were going to do. So I was nervous for other things, but certainly that one, it was more just like, guys, please, it was more just do what you've been doing all the time. That's it. And their list was not quite as difficult as the Chinese, so there was always a chance that if the Chinese dived to their full capability, it would be a very close thing, indeed. So yeah, I think coaches and sport, we're always nervous when it's a bit touch and go. You've not seen it all. You've seen it in bits and pieces in training. But I think those that win and are used to winning, there's something about the mental approach and thing that you just, you can almost just sit and know that they're going to deliver.
Well, from that great
Yeah.
success to how did you start working with Dina Asher Smith, who's been incredibly successful?
Yeah, so well, no, it was actually I treated a strength coach some time back for and then it just so happened that her previous physio had a lot of different engagements, just it couldn't really fit and manage everything, so there was an opportunity, and so the strength coach kind of said, well, would you like to? And I said, oh, of course I would. So it was just a process. Dina, again, is just one of those athletes who knows exactly what she needs, what she wants, and what she's looking for. In a physio, having worked with a lot of physios before, and her previous physio, well, his osteopath actually is just excellent. He's absolutely brilliant. So it was big shoes to fill, and I think my first thing was just to try and do and continue what the good work he was already doing, and just keeping that as consistent and as close to what Dina was used to and what she was expecting. So yeah, no, so we had a little bit of a trial, and then actually that worked out all right. And so yeah, we've continued, and so it's been very good. I've been regularly in touch, you know, with the previous osteopath, and because it was a very you know, it's been very much a supportive environment. He's been very, you know, keen to, you know, to help me with his insights and things, which were really helpful. And I think for Dean, it's meant that the transition has been a lot more seamless. It's not this stop with one, start with another. It's been quite well integrated in that. So yeah, you know, it takes a good 2 years, you know, to develop a really good relationship with coach and athlete and things. So I've been very grateful for that opportunity, just working with other members of a team, and just learning, you know, a lot from herself. But you know, again, you know, having worked with, you know, someone like a Tom or a Jack or a Kirsty, or you know, these elite athletes are very similar in terms of their mindset, and so and their expectations. So it's been, you know, from my point of view, it's been a really good transition, and just doing that, and something that, you know, she's appreciated. So long may it continue.
No, very, very much so. And then, so what are the plans for you going forward? So you're going to continue with both sets. I know you're traveling abroad. We had the pleasure of spending an evening in Paris
Yeah,
together, which was great.
yeah, no, it was really good. So I think, yeah, no, I think you know, certainly up until the Olympics next year, that's the plan. I always take time out after the Olympics just to evaluate, you know, where things are, because you know, if you're going to commit, it's always a 4 year cycle. So you commit for 4 years, not like for part of it. And I think so. I always take a good bit of time afterwards and kind of evaluate and see where I am, and you know, what the energy is, or the mental energy is, balancing that with, you know, the you know, you know, other things in terms of the practice, and you know, life in general. So yeah, very committed to that, and until 24, and then yeah, after that we'll see. I think I'll always be involved in sport in one way or another. It's in the blood. But you know, at some point you start to say it's good for the next generation to, you know, to be, you know, taking over, and you know, because it's, you know, spending 3-4 months of the year away is you know, it's you know, I've been doing that for you know, a couple of decades now. It is, yeah, it is a good time. This will be the sixth Olympics, so yeah, so I only ever wanted to go to one, and never in my wildest dreams imagined it would be six. So
Yeah, it's incredible.
yes,
And what would your
yeah.
advice be for that next generation of people coming through, or people thinking of getting into it? What would you say to them?
Yeah, I think, you know, first of all, I think it's, you know, it's always important to be passionate about, you know, the things that you want to do, because on those bad days, if it's just a job, it's going to be tough. And in sport is very demanding. You go above and beyond, you know, what it says on the piece of paper, and that's because the athletes you're working with are doing the same. So they have the same expectations of everybody around them. The coach is doing that, and so as support staff, it's no different. And if you're going to be at the performance end of things, that is the I'd definitely say it's important to be well prepared. And you know, from a clinical point of view, you make sure you've got excellent hands-on skills and diagnostic skills, and you know, just your rehabilitation, because all of those things must come as standard. You have short periods of time. You're working under pressure, you know, to return people to play. And as you get into professional sport and money is involved, and medals are involved, then those pressures, you know, doing the basics correctly become even more important. So that become, I think you have to have good communication skills. So you really have to develop that aspect, because you have to communicate clearly with, you know, other members of the team, you know, with the athlete, with a coach. And I think and understanding that sometimes the needs of the sport are going to be more important than what you are trying to do and what you're trying to achieve, and just understanding that, you know, that balance. Um, and I think if you're starting out in that journey, I think it's important to learn, you know, to volunteer, reach out to people that are already in the industry. And by and large, they generally don't mind if you're going to come and shadow and just watch a little bit of what they're doing, and just get an idea. And it's not paid work, but it's learning, but it's networking, it's being in the right place, because one day your opportunity will come because you're in the right place at the right time. And those things, when you're adding to the CV, the volunteering, to do post marathon massage, someone, it's getting a bit of your skills, but it's also putting yourself in that environment. And just yeah, and I think, at the end, it is about just the networking aspect. But you got to be prepared, because the day you'll be called upon to do things, you get your opportunity, and when you get it, you seize it with both hands. That really is the thing with that.
Yeah, great. No, well, that's a great note to finish on. So, Gareth, I appreciate you fitting me in between your busy clinics and
Yeah,
traveling
not a
around
problem.
London. So, yeah. No, but it's great to see you, and good luck with everything that you're going on. And I'm looking forward to coming down and catching up with you in London soon.
Yeah, fantastic. Look forward to that.
Brilliant. Thanks for your time, Gareth.
Yeah,
Cheers.
thank you.
Bye bye.